Rigoletto is an opera in 3 acts by Giuseppe Verdi. The Italian libretto was written by Francesco Maria Piave based on the play L'Héroïse s'amuse by Victor Hugo. Despite serious initial problems with the Austrian censors who had control over northern Italian theatres at the time, the opera had a triumphant premiere at La Fenice in Venice on March 11, 1851. It is considered by many to be the first of the operatic masterpieces of Verdi's middle to late career. Its tragic story revolves around the licentious Duke of Mantua, his hunch-backed court jester Rigoletto, and Rigoletto's beautiful daughter Gilda. The opera's original title, La Maledizione, refers to the curse placed on both the Duke and Rigoletto by a courtier whose daughter had been seduced by the Duke with Rigoletto's encouragement. The curse comes to fruition when Gilda likewise falls in love with the Duke and eventually sacrifices her life to save him from the assassins hired by her father. Composition history. Verdi was commissioned to write a new opera by the La Fenice Opera House in Venice in 1850. By this time he was already a well-known composer and had a degree of freedom in choosing the works he would prefer to set to music. He then asked Francesco Maria Piave to examine the play Kean by Alexandre Dumas, Paris, but he felt he needed a more energetic subject to work on. Verdi soon stumbled upon Victor Hugo's L'Héroïse s'amuse. He later explained that the subject is grand, immense, and there is a character that is one of the greatest creations that the theatre can boast of, in any country and in all history. It was a highly controversial subject, and Hugo himself had already had trouble with censorship in France, which had banned productions of his play after its first performance nearly 20 years earlier. As Austria at the time directly controlled much of northern Italy, it came before the Austrian Board of Censors. Hugo's play depicted a king as an immoral and cynical womanizer, something that was not accepted in Europe during the Restoration period. From the beginning, Verdi was aware of the risks, as was Piave. In a letter which Verdi wrote to Piave, "Use 4 legs, run through the town and find me an influential person who can obtain the permission for making L'Héroïse s'amuse." Correspondence between a prudent Piave and an already committed Verdi followed, but the two underestimated the power and the intentions of Austrians and remained at risk. Even the friendly Guglielmo Brenner, secretary of La Fenice, who had promised them that they would not have problems with the censors, was wrong. At the beginning of the summer of 1850, rumors started to spread that Austrian censorship was going to forbid the production. The censors considered the Hugo work to verge on lèse-majesté copyright and would never permit such a scandalous work to be performed in Venice. In August, Verdi and Piave prudently retired to Busseto, Verdi's hometown, to continue the composition and prepare a defensive scheme. They wrote to the theatre, assuring them that the censors' doubts about the morality of the work were not justified, but since very little time was left, very little could be done. At the time, Piave and Verdi had titled the opera La Maledizione, and this unofficial title was used by Austrian censor de Gortzkowski in an emphatic letter written in December 1850 in which he definitively denied consent to its production, calling it a repugnant example of immorality and obscene triviality. In order not to waste all their work, Piave tried to revise the libretto and was even able to pull from it another opera, Il Duca di Vendôme, in which the sovereign was with the Duke and both the hunchback and the curse disappeared. Verdi was completely against this proposed solution and preferred instead to have direct negotiations with censors, arguing over each and every point of the work. At this point, Brenner, La Fenice's secretary, showed the Austrians some letters and articles depicting the bad character but the great value of the artist, helping to mediate the dispute. By January 1851 the parties were able to agree that the action of the opera would be moved from the royal court of France to a duchy of France or Italy, and some of the characters would have to be renamed. In the new version the Duke reigns over Mantua and belongs to the Gonzaga family. The House of Gonzaga had long been extinct by the mid-19th century, and the Dukedom of Mantua no longer existed, thus no one could be offended. The scene in which the sovereign retires to Gilda's bedroom would be deleted and the visit of the Duke to the taverna was no longer intentional, but provoked by a trick. The hunchback jester was renamed Rigoletto from a parody of Hugo's play, Rigoletti, Una dernière dei fous. By January 14, the opera's definitive title had become Rigoletto. Verdi finally completed the composition of the opera on February 5, 1851, a little more than a month before the premiere, although as he worked on the final stages of Act 3, Piave had already arranged for the sets to be designed. The singers were given some of their music to learn on February 7. However, Verdi kept at least a third of the score at Busseto. He brought it with him when he arrived in Venice for the rehearsals on February 19 and would continue to refine the orchestration during the rehearsal period. For the premiere, La Fenice had cast Felice Versi as Rigoletto, the young tenor Raphael Myrat as the Duke, and Teresa Brambilla as Gilda. Due to the high risk of unauthorized copying, Verdi had demanded the maximum secrecy from all his singers and musicians. Myrat had use of his score only a few evenings before the premiere and had to swear that he would not sing or even whistle the tune of La Donna Mobile except during the rehearsals. Performance history. 19th-century productions. Rigoletto premiered on March 11, 1851 in a sold-out La Fenice as the first part of a double bill with Giacomo Panizza's ballet Faust. Gaetano Mears conducted, and the sets were designed and executed by Giuseppe Verdi and Francesco Bagnara. The opening night was a complete triumph, especially the Scena Drammatica and the Duke's cynical aria, La Donna Mobile, which was sung in the streets the next morning. Many years later, Giulia Cora Versi, the daughter of Felice Versi, described her father's performance at the premiere. Versi was very uncomfortable with the false hump he had to wear. He was so uncertain that, even though he was quite an experienced singer, he had a panic attack when it was his turn to enter the stage. Verdi immediately realized he was paralyzed and roughly pushed him on the stage, so he appeared with a clumsy tumble. The audience, thinking it was an intentional gag, was very amused. Rigoletto was a great box office success for La Fenice and Verdi's first major Italian triumph since the 1847 premiere of Macbeth in Florence. It initially had a run of 13 performances and was revived in Venice the following year, and again in 1854. Despite a rather disastrous production in Bergamo shortly after its initial run at La Fenice, the opera soon entered the repertory of Italian theatres. By 1852, it has premiered in all the major cities of Italy, although sometimes under different titles due to the vagaries of censorship. From 1852, it also began to be performed in major cities worldwide, reaching as far afield as Alexandria and Constantinople in 1854 and both Montevideo and Havana in 1855. The UK premiere took place on May 14, 1853 at what is now the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden in London, with Giovanni Matteo Mario as the Duke of Mantua and Giorgio Ronconi as Rigoletto. In the US, the opera was first seen on February 19, 1855 at New York's Academy of Music. 20th century and beyond, in modern times, it has become a staple of the standard operatic repertoire. It appears as number 9 on the Operaverse list of the most performed operas worldwide between 2008/2009 and 2012/13 seasons, and was also the 9th most frequently performed opera in Italy during that period. Several modern productions have radically changed the original setting. These include Jonathan Miller's 1982 production for the English National Opera, which is set amongst the mafia in New York City's Little Italy during the 1950s. Doris Day's 2005 production for the Barbarian State Opera, where the court of Mantua became the planet of the apes. Director Linda Brovsky's production for Seattle Opera, placing the story in Mussolini's fascist Italy, in 2004. And Michael Mayer's 2013 production for the Metropolitan Opera, which is set in a casino in 1960s Las Vegas. Different characters portray different archetypes from the Rat Pack era, with the Duke becoming a Frank Sinatra-type character and Rigoletto becoming Don Rickles. In March 2014, Lindy Hume, artistic director of Australia's QPAC, staged the opera set in the party-going world of disgraced former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. Roles. Synopsis: Place, Mantua. Time, the 16th century. Act 1, Scene 1, a room in the palace. At a ball in his palace, the Duke sings of a life of pleasure with as many women as possible, questa o quella. He has seen an unknown beauty in church and desires to possess her, but he also wishes to seduce the Countess of Soprano. Rigoletto, the Duke's hunchbacked court jester, mocks the husbands of the ladies to whom the Duke is paying attention, and advises the Duke to get rid of them by prison or death. Marillo, one of the guests at the ball, informs the nobleman that Rigoletto has a lover, and the nobleman cannot believe it. The nobleman resolved to take vengeance on Rigoletto. Subsequently Rigoletto mocks Count Monterone, whose daughter the Duke had seduced. Count Monterone is arrested at the Duke's order and curses the Duke and Rigoletto. The curse genuinely terrifies Rigoletto. Scene 2, A Street, with the courtyard of Rigoletto's house. Thinking of the curse, Rigoletto approaches his house and is accosted by the assassin Sparafusile, who walks up to him and offers his services. Rigoletto considers the proposition but finally declines. Sparafusile wanders off, after repeating his own name a few times. Rigoletto contemplates the similarities between the two of them, parissimo. Sparafusile kills men with his sword, and Rigoletto uses a tongue of malice to stab his victims. Rigoletto opens a door in the wall and returns home to his daughter Gilda. They greet each other warmly, Figlia. Mio padre. Rigoletto has been concealing his daughter from the Duke and the rest of the city, and she does not know her father's occupation. Since he has forbidden her to appear in public, she has been nowhere except to church and does not even know her own father's name. When Rigoletto has gone, the Duke appears and overhears Gilda confess to her nurse Giovanna that she feels guilty for not having told her father about a young man she had met at the church. She says that she fell in love with him, but that she would love him even more if he were a student and poor. As she declares her love, the Duke enters, overjoyed. Gilda, alarmed, calls for Giovanna, unaware that the Duke had sent her away. Pretending to be a student, the Duke convinces Gilda of his love, il soldello anima. When she asks for his name, he hesitantly calls himself Gualtier. Hearing sounds and fearing that her father has returned, Gilda sends the Duke away after they quickly trade vows of love, addio, addio. Alone, Gilda meditates on her love for the Duke, whom she believes is a student, Gualtier. Cara nome. Later, a preoccupied Rigoletto returns, Rido. Percha copyright. While the hostile noblemen outside the walled garden get ready to abduct the helpless girl. Convincing Rigoletto that they are actually abducting the Countess Soprano, they blindfold him and use him to help with the abduction, zitti. With her father's unknowing assistance Gilda is carried away by the nobleman. Upon realizing that it was in fact Gilda who was carried away, Rigoletto collapses, remembering the curse. Act 2, The Duke's Palace. The Duke is concerned that Gilda has disappeared, ella mi fu rapita. And parmi vedela lagrime. The noblemen then enter and inform him that they have captured Rigoletto's mistress. By their description, he recognizes it to be Gilda and rushes off to the room where she is held, percent ama mi chiama. Pleased by the Duke's strange excitement, the courtiers now make sport with Rigoletto, who enters singing. He tries to find Gilda by pretending to be uncaring, as he fears she may fall into the hands of the Duke. Finally, he admits that he is in fact seeking his daughter and asks the courtiers to return her to him, cortigiani, vil razzidanita. Rigoletto attempts to run into the room in which Gilda is being held, but the noblemen beat him. Gilda rushes in and begs her father to send the people away. The men leave the room, believing Rigoletto has gone mad. Gilda describes to her father what has happened to her in the palace, Tud la feste el tempio. In a duet Rigoletto demands vengeance against the Duke, while Gilda pleads for her lover, Czar. Vendetta, tremenda vendetta. Act 3, A Street outside Sparafusile's house. A portion of Sparafusile's house is seen, with two rooms open to the view of the audience. Rigoletto and Gilda, who still loves the Duke, arrive outside. The Duke's voice can be heard singing La Donna Immobile, laying out the infidelity and fickle nature of women. Rigoletto makes Gilda realize that it is the Duke who is in the assassin's house attempting to seduce Sparafusile's sister, Maddalena, Bella Figlia dell'Amore. Rigoletto bargains with the assassin, who is ready to murder his guest for money, and offers him 20 scudi to kill the Duke. He orders his daughter to put on a man's clothes to prepare to leave for Verona and states that he plans to follow later. With falling darkness, a thunderstorm approaches and the Duke determines to remain in the house. Sparafusal assigns to him the ground floor sleeping quarters. Gilda, who still loves the Duke despite knowing him to be unfaithful, returns dressed as a man. She overhears Madalena begging for the Duke's life, and Sparafusal promises her that if by midnight another can be found in place of the Duke, he will spare the Duke's life. Gilda resolves to sacrifice herself for the Duke and enters the house. She is immediately mortally wounded and collapses. At midnight, when Rigoletto arrives with money, he receives a corpse wrapped in a sack, and rejoices in his triumph. Weighting it with stones, he is about to cast the sack into the river when he hears the voice of the Duke singing a reprise of his La Donna Mobile aria. Bewildered, Rigoletto opens the sack and, to his despair, discovers his mortally wounded daughter. For a moment, she revives and declares she is glad to die for her beloved, though ingannato. She dies in his arms. Rigoletto's wildest fear materializes when he cries out in horror, La maledizione. Instrumentation: the orchestra calls for 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, 4 horns in Eb, D, C, Ab, G, and F, 2 trumpets in C, D, and Eb, 3 trombones, some basso, timpani, bass drum and cymbals, strings. Off-stage, banda, bass drum, 2 bells, thunder machine, on stage, violins and 2 violas, and contrabasses. Music. Musicologist Julian Budden regards the opera as revolutionary, just as Beethoven's Eroica Symphony was. The barriers between formal melody and recitative are down as never before. In the whole opera, there is only one conventional double aria. And there are no concerted act finales. Verdi used that same word revolutionary in a letter to Piave, and Budden also refers to a letter which Verdi wrote in 1852 in which the composer states that I conceived Rigoletto almost without arias, without finales but only an unending string of duets. Budden's conclusions about this opera and its place in Verdi's outputs is summed up by noting that, just after 1850 at the age of 38 Verdi closed the door on a period of Italian opera with Rigoletto. The so-called Ottocento in music is finished. Verdi will continue to draw on certain of its forms for the next few operas, but in a totally new spirit. Recordings and adaptations. There have been dozens of commercial recordings of Rigoletto. The earliest ones include the 1912 performance in French with Fenice section Wallman conducting the orchestra and chorus of the opera copyright Ra Comique and the 1916 performance in Italian with Lorenzo Moligioli conducting the orchestra and chorus of La Scala. The first LP edition was released by RCA Victor in 1950 conducted by Renato Cellini and featured Leonard Warren in the title role. The opera has also been recorded in German with Wilhelm Schuh ¼ CHTER conducting the orchestra and chorus of the Berlin State Opera in a 1953 recording for EMI Records and in English with Mark Elder conducting the orchestra and chorus of the English National Opera in a 1983 recording for EMI. In the 21st century there have been several live performances released on DVD including a 2001 performance from London's Royal Opera House with Paolo Gavanelli as Rigoletto and Marcello Alvarez as the Duke and a 2006 performance at the Open Horse ¼ Rich with Leo Nucci as Rigoletto and Piet Psala as the Duke. The Duke of Mantua's arias, particularly La Donna Mobile, and Questa e Quella, have long been showcases for the tenor voice and appear on numerous recital discs. Amongst Enrico Caruso's earliest recordings are both these arias, recorded with piano accompaniment in 1903 and again in 1906 with a full orchestra. Luciano Pavarotti, who has recorded the arias for several recital discs, also sings the Duke on 3 complete studio recordings of the opera, Decca conducted by Richard Benninge, Decca conducted by Riccardo Chailly, and Deutsche Grammophon conducted by James Levine. Rigoletto has been a popular subject for movies since the silent film era. On April 15, 1923, Lee De Forest presented 18 short films in his Sound on Film Process phonofilm, including an excerpt of Act II of Rigoletto with Eva Leoni and company. Some film versions, such as the 1993 children's film Rigoletto, are based on the opera's plot, but do not use Verdi's music. Curtis Clayton's 2003 film Rick, set in modern-day New York, has a plot based on Rigoletto, but apart from La Donna Immobile heard in the background during a restaurant scene, does not include any other music from the opera. In the 21st century, the opera was filmed as Rigoletto's story directed by Vittorio Scarbi with costumes by Vivienne Westwood. First screened at the Venice Biennale in 2004, it subsequently received 2 Grammy nominations. In September 2010, RAI Television filmed the opera on location in Mantua with the court scenes taking place in the Palazzo Te. The film faithfully followed Verdi's original specification for the action to take place over 2 days, and each act was performed at the time of day indicated in the libretto. Broadcast live to 148 countries, the film starred Placido Domingo in the title role, and Vittorio Grigolo as the Duke. The plot of the film Quartet revolves around the quartet Bella Figlia dell'Amore, with which the film concludes. Adaptations of the opera's music include Franz Liszt's Rigoletto paraphrase, a piano transcription of Bella Figlia dell'Amore, and a Fantasia on Rigoletto by Sigismund Thalberg which was published in Paris in the 1860s. References, notes. Cited sources, Budden, Julian. The Operas of Verdi, Volume 1, From Oberto to Rigoletto. London, Castle. ISBN 0-304-31058-1, Casaglia, Rado. Rigoletto. Armanico Amadeus. Downes, Olin, The Lure of Music, Depicting the Human Side of Great Composers. New York, Harper and Brothers, 1918, Kimball, David, in Holden, Amanda, The New Penguin Opera Guide, New York, Penguin Putnam, 2001. ISBN 0-14-029312-4, Kimball, David, Verdi in the Age of Italian Romanticism. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press Archive. ISBN 0-521-31678-2, Loomis, George. The Peter Jonas Touch, A Home for Interpretive Opera in Munich. International Herald Tribune. Retrieved April 20, 2012. Martin, George W. Verdi in America, Oberto through Rigoletto. Rochester, University of Rochester Press. ISBN 1-58046-388-6, Malitz, Leo The Opera Goer's Complete Guide. New York, Dodd, Mead, Osorio, Anne. Unique Rigoletto Live from Mantua. Opera Today. Retrieved April 20, 2012. Parker, Roger, Rigoletto, in Stanley Sadie, The New Grove Dictionary of Opera, Vol. 3. London, Macmillan Publishers, Incorporated 1998. ISBN 0-333-73432-7, ISBN 1-56159-228-5. Phillips Matz, Mary Jane. Verdi, A Biography, London and New York, Oxford University Press. ISBN 0-19-313-204-4. Other sources, Baldini, Gabriele, The Story of Giuseppe Verdi, Oberto to un ballo in Maschera. Cambridge, A.L., Cambridge University Press. ISBN 0-521-29712-5. Schuzid, Martin, Verdi a Euro unregistered trademark S. Middle period, 1849–1859, Chicago and London, University of Chicago Press. ISBN 0-226-10658-6, ISBN 0-226-10659-4. Devan, Gillis, Verdi a Euro unregistered trademark S. Theatre, Creating Drama Through Music. Chicago and London, University of Chicago Press. ISBN 0-226-14369-4. ISBN 0-226-14370-8, Gossett, Philip, Divas and Scholar, Performing Italian Opera, Chicago, University of Chicago Press. ISBN 0-226-30482-5, Hugo, Adela. Victor Hugo. New York, Carlton, Martin, George, Verdi, His Music, Life and Times, New York, Dodd, Mead and Company. ISBN 0-396-08196-7, O'Connor, John. Jonathan Miller's Mafia Rigoletto. New York Times. Retrieved April 20, 2012. Osborne, Charles, The Complete Opera of Verdi, New York, Da Capo Press, Incorporated. ISBN 0-306-80072-1, Parker, Roger, The New Grove Guide to Verdi and His Operas, Oxford and New York, Oxford University Press. ISBN 978-0-19-531314-7, Pistone, Daniela, 19th Century Italian Opera, From Rossini to Puccini, Portland, Oregon, Amadeus Press. ISBN 0-931340-82-9, Toy, Francis, Giuseppe Verdi, His Life and Works, New York, Knopf, Walker, Frank, The Man Verdi, New York, Knopf, 1962, Chicago, University of Chicago Press. ISBN 0-226-87132-0, Warwick, John and West, Ewan, The Oxford Dictionary of Opera New York, OUP 1992 ISBN 0-19-869164-5, Werfel, Franz and Stefan, Paul, Verdi, The Man and His Letters, New York, Vienna House. ISBN 0-8443-0088-8, external links, Verdi, The Story, and History on Giuseppe Verdi at Rigoletto, free scores at the International Music Score Library Project, Rigoletto Piano Vocals Score from Indiana University's online opera scores database, libretto in the original Italian and in English translation, San Diego Opera Talk. With Nick Revolves, Verdi's Rigoletto, Rigoletto at IMDb, Rigoletto, Act II at Silent Era.